everyone, and welcome to the Jeff Bullas Show. Today I have with me Marcelo Calbucci. Now, Marcelo's dialing in from Seattle, and I'm hanging out here on my birthday, actually, in Sydney, Australia. And Marcelo is an entrepreneur, innovator, technologist, and author. He's been building software products for over 30 years, having sold his first software at age 14. Marcelo, you sound like an overachiever, and we're going to talk about that. He has worked at Microsoft Exchange Server and Bing, and at Amazon, people experience and technology, leading software engineering, product, data science, and UX. And UX means user experience. He has founded 6 startups in Seattle and London and launched a dozen tech projects. He's the inventor of 11 patents. Marcelo has been a community builder in Seattle, organizing dozens of meetups, events, and conferences. He has written over 1,000 blog posts and articles on his website and other tech publications. He's a man after my own heart because I've written thousands of blog posts as well. So that's what I've been doing with my time, and Marcelo obviously with his. Outside of tech and startups, Marcelo loves to cook elaborate meals for friends, run marathons, 8 and counting, and travel with his wife and kids. Marcelo, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. And I didn't know it was your birthday, so happy birthday.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm 35 again. Been 35 for the last 33 years. So
yeah, sounds good.
So, Marcelo, you've got quite a rich heritage. You're of Italian heritage. You've actually, I think, were born and raised in Brazil, and now you live in Seattle. So I'm always intrigued by people's stories. In other words, what brought them to where they are today. So, Marcelo, you're obviously basically a born entrepreneur, and you've been living and breathing the digital tech in the digital tech industry. So where did this all start? When you were a young child, a teenager, was there a curiosity about technology? Where did this curiosity about tech start?
Yeah, so basically, it's a story of many kids. When I was a teenager, 12, 13, I got really curious about computers. It was the 80s, so computers were not prevalent in people's household. But I was lucky that my father, worked in technology, telecommunications, so he always brought home like interesting pieces of gadget. And I got my first computer at age 13. And I love it. I fell in love with it. At the time, there wasn't a lot to do with computers, right? You couldn't connect to the internet. There weren't that many video games. And like at one point, you're like, wow, I have to code this thing to do something interesting. So you learn to code and you start developing software. And I just fell in love with, solving problems through software, right? So that's how it set me off on this journey, working in tech companies and startups. Basically, software is my weapon.
Right. So, yeah, well, you've been given a gift that I wasn't given, right? So I started using computers in the 80s as well, but I needed programs and frameworks for me to use. I needed a nice, friendly user interface because I tried to actually do, programming using BASIC, and it just made my brain turn to mush and my eyes glaze over. So I really have not tried to program since. I don't know if I ever will, but for me, just that sort of gift in a technology world is something that's quite precious. So, and obviously you've used it to good effect.
Yeah, I think things have evolved quite a bit as well. Like if you would try to learn how to code today, it would be probably easier. There's a lot more tools, a lot of software that assists you on like writing the code. Even ChatGPT, like you can ask ChatGPT to write a piece of code for you. You copy and paste into another interface and you run it. I mean, it might not work exactly the way you expected, but like to get started, it's very useful.
Right. So you use computers and software coding to actually solve problems, right? And you've been involved in doing startups. So you're at 14, you write some software. Who did you sell the software to age 14?
Well, the first buyer of my software was my dad.
Oh, right.
So he asked me to write a software to catalog all his vinyl collection. So not only I wrote the software, but I typed in, he probably had like 400, 500, vinyls, and I typed in all the data of all the songs and all the musicians and the albums, and like we could easily search and index everything. So he was
Right.
the first buyer of my software.
Right. Well, that's very convenient. So I hope you got a good deal.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're a teenager, like any money is good money.
Yeah, I know. Well, my dad was a plumber, so I actually just used to go and dig holes for him during my school holidays. So that was my. I didn't do any programming for him, but okay. So you're into tech. So what was the next major step that came along? Was it you decided obviously to go to university and study technology?
Yeah, so I always felt that technology could solve a lot of people's problems, right? Personal problems, professional problems, all kinds of problems. So I had this passion of figuring out how to use software to address. My family is very entrepreneurial. Like they had a lot of small business. My mom had a PR agency. My uncle had an insurance agency. And in the 80s, early 90s, there wasn't a lot of software there. So I started building software for them and got that satisfaction of seeing it work for them,
Right.
right? And so I went to computer science, got a degree in computer science. Shortly after that, Microsoft went to Brazil in the late 90s to hire people to come to Seattle to work here. And this is how I end up in Seattle
Right.
as part of that recruiting program. And I worked at Microsoft for 7 years as a software engineer before deciding that really I was more of an entrepreneurial and I need to do more innovative things. So I left and I was a founder and a startup leader for almost 20 years.
Right. So what was your first startup? You're in, and this started in Seattle.
Yes. So my first startup was, I tried to convince Microsoft to do it, actually. It was the early 2000s and the web was just exploding. And I wanted to create a system where it was really easy for small businesses and for people to build websites.
Hmm.
In the early 2000s, if you wanted to build a website, you had to learn how to program. You had to learn HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and you need to, if you wanted to have a database, you need to learn SQL and all the tech tools out there. And I felt that was not necessary. I've been building websites for my family for a long time, and I felt like I could build a tool where anyone could build any website without doing anything. Now you have tools like Squarespace and Wix and Webflow that allow you to do that. At the time, there was nothing. So my first startup was actually that. In the beginning was build any website. Then we narrowed down to build family websites, a website about, a wedding or a baby or a family that you want to publish articles. This was before social media as well. So if you want to share stories or pictures with your family, there weren't really mechanisms to do it back then. So that was my first startup.
Okay. So what time did, so for me, a lot of websites are built with WordPress, and there's been a lot of competitors for that, but WordPress still has a huge installed base, doesn't it, around the world? I think it's in the hundreds of millions of websites almost. So
Yeah.
did you start at the similar time to WordPress?
Yes, we started very similar times. It was a time there was an explosion of new ideas around the web. Squarespace started around the same time as well, and Wix started at the same time as well. And they became very successful companies. My company didn't because we moved into families and then Facebook came along a couple years later and like families didn't need to have a website anymore. They could simply share on Facebook, share their stories, share their pictures, share their videos, build community. So that was what disrupted my first startup.
Right. So let's do fast forward to the inspiration behind PRFAQ, which is your new book. Tell us a little bit about, so what was the inspiration for that? And I believe it could have been started at Amazon. Tell us where that inspiration came from for the book. Let's find out more about that framework.
Yeah, I was an entrepreneur for a long time, working with startups for a long time and innovators. In 2022, I joined Amazon to lead a new team for a new product at Amazon. And Amazon is very peculiar. It has lots of frameworks that it invented and used internally. One of these frameworks is the PRFAQ, which stands for Press Release and Frequently Asked Questions. And it's part of their working backwards practices. And, you know, I was exposed to the PRFAQ, and you sit in a meeting and they provide you with a 6-page document, and you read the document in silence. And everyone is reading the document. And only after that 20 minutes, we start talking about the project. So the PRFAQ is a way to capture, you know, an innovation or an idea or initiative, and to discuss the merits of it, right? To decide if we should do it or not. And I was like, after the second or third one that I was participating, like first few weeks at Amazon, I was like, huh, this is really interesting. Maybe founders, you know, should use this to capture their ideas. Then I realized, wait a second, this is not about founders. This is about any kind of innovation project or initiative, because it's a really good tool to discover, debate, and decide on a strategy and a vision. It's not a planning tool, right? It's not like a framework to decide what to do, like OKRs, for example, or you know, a brainstorming tool like design thinking. It is a tool really to focus on strategy and vision, to make sure that everyone is aligned and agreeing on like that's the direction we should move towards. And I felt it was brilliant. So I kind of like really fell in love with it, right? So I used extensively at Amazon. And when I left a couple of years later, I was like, I want to evangelize this framework. So initially, it wasn't supposed to be a book. It was just supposed to be a series of articles that I was going to write and tell everyone about it. There were very little written about PRFAQ. And then it grew into a book because I felt there was a lot of things that I could include there.
So this is the concept at Amazon. So obviously, it sounds like you've actually made your own, I suppose, evolution of that. Right. So
That's right.
What have you've taken this core idea, which worked and obviously worked well for Amazon and used for teams. And a friend of mine, she used to work for does AWS, and she talked about this framework, which I've looked at. I haven't really applied it. So what have you've taken this core idea at Amazon and say this is really good for a whole range of things, not just projects or an idea within a new product line, for example, at Amazon, which I think was one of the reasons they developed it. So how did you evolve that? Or is it better for you to describe what the PRFAQ framework is?
Yeah, let me quickly describe what the document, the PRFAQ document looks like, and how I adapted it from the Amazon style to make it more useful, more practical for other people, right? So the PRFAQ is a 6-page document, right? So the first page is a press release. So you write a press release that you're not going to send to the press, but you write on the present tense as if the product or the business or the service was already here, right? Or a program or anything that you are talking about. So you make it like a visionary statement about this product. Like today we are launching blah, blah, blah. We are announcing blah, blah, blah. We're releasing blah, blah, blah. And you explain what it is, you explain the problem that you're solving, how you're solving. You include some fictional customer quotes. So that's your press release, right? Then you have 1 page of customer FAQs. So imagine that a customer of that product would ask some questions like, how do I get started? What is the price? Do I need to import my data? Or am I eligible to participate on this program? So you write 1 page of that, all fictional, right? Because you're painting a vision of the future. And then you have 4 pages of what's called internal FAQs. And what these internal FAQs are, they are answering questions about the feasibility, the viability, the problem, the solution, the go-to-market, distribution of this product, some hard choices about what we are not doing, what we are doing. And then use the 6 pages to have review sessions with your peers, your team, your leadership, stakeholders in the organization, to adjust and discover things that you haven't thought about,
Mm-hmm.
identify gaps on your logic, right? But always at a very strategical level, right? Like you're not talking about the details of the activities that you're going to do. You want to make sure that what you're doing is valuable for the organization, is valuable for the customer, and it's worth pursuing as an opportunity as compared to all other opportunities that you have on your table,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you keep on that high level. So what's different from what I wrote on my book and what Amazon does is Amazon really doesn't have a method for you to create a PRFAQ and for you to review PRFAQs, because it's part of the culture. Like everyone knows how to do that there, or learn how to do by observing other people doing it.
Yep.
So I codify a method to do that. And on the document side, I simplify a few things as well. So Amazon has a lot of resources. So they can spend months working on a PRFAQ, do custom research, user research, qualitative research, that as a founder or a product manager or a program leader in a small organization, you don't have that many resources. So you have to deal with less to present that document. So that's how it differentiates from what Amazon does.
Right. So the thing I'm thinking about too is talk about brainstorming, peers, reviews, everything else. So with the rise of ChatGPT and its evolution in terms of almost like tapping into the wisdom, knowledge, information of the planet, in other words, it's collected and curated and distilled, all the information that's uploaded to the web. So AI, ChatGPT wouldn't exist without that. So could you use AI or ChatGPT to help you accelerate developing a PRFAQ?
Yes and no. So yes,
Okay.
you can accelerate if you use it the right way, meaning if you use ChatGPT to do some research for you or to evaluate gaps in some of your thinking, that's great. But the purpose of a PRFAQ is that as you write, as you're answering questions and you're writing the press release, like you are thinking through the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like it helps open your mind to like, oh, I haven't thought about that. Now I need to think about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you spend your times like processing and digesting, thinking critically about your idea until you arrive at a coherent proposal. If ChatGPT is doing that work for you, ChatGPT is doing the thinking, not you. You're not learning how to articulate idea. You're not finding some wedges in the market or the opportunity that the ChatGPT would not think about. ChatGPT is great at answering common knowledge and average content, right? But not thinking outside of the box. It's a funny way of saying it because it is a box actually, right?
Yep.
Like you said, it's based on the content that is available out there. So if you want to innovate, sometimes ChatGPT is not as good as copying stuff that already exists.
Yeah. So in terms of, copying what already exists, in other words, what I quite often like about ChatGPT and AI, actually, it comes up with combinations that I hadn't thought of. In other words, and then it comes down is the art of writing the right prompt to actually almost help you brainstorm. So have you had any experience with that in terms of using it to brainstorm using ChatGPT to brainstorm with your framework?
Yeah, so you have to pick apart, the PRFAQ and segment the sections, right? So you might be thinking about, I want to solve a problem for veterinarians, let's say. And if you don't have a lot of experience with veterinarians, you don't know what problem you're going to solve, you can use ChatGPT to say, like, what are likely problems that veterinarians have? And ChatGPT is going to give you an answer, but you shouldn't really trust it, right? Like after you give you some answers, you should go out there and like figure out if that's true or not, right? And it's not only on the webs, you should talk with veterinarians
Yeah.
to understand if that's a valid concern or not,
Mm-hmm.
right? On the solution side of the house, that's where things gets more interesting. So you can go to ChatGPT and say, veterinarians spend a lot of time doing accounting, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how can I solve this problem for them? ChatGPT actually is going to be pretty good at giving you some ideas. But more likely than not, these ideas, even if you think they are new and innovative, these ideas are likely already out there.
Yep.
right? So like are you really creating something new? The best way to do that is actually to talk to your customers, to talk with other people, to think critically about it, to create hypotheses and go test those hypotheses.
Right. So let's have a look at some practical examples of the use of, using PRFAQ outside of Amazon that companies have taken the model, taken the framework, and applied it. Are there any? Can you provide some successful case studies of this model being applied, this template framework being applied outside of Amazon?
Yeah, absolutely. I know many startup founders and many startups that have adopted PRFAQ as part of their planning process, right? So objectives and key results became very popular, maybe over the last 5 years or so, and lots of startups use that to do planning. However, there is always something missing when you do OKRs, which is what is the story behind why we're doing, what's the purpose of this?
Hmm.
And this is where PRFAQ fits in. So I've seen startups that have adopted PRFAQ as preliminary work before you do your quarterly planning or annual planning, right?
Hmm.
So people can debate and discover strategies and visions that sound interesting, and then use that, as a guiding to say like, yeah, let's pursue that. We already have a vision and strategy in place. And now we can have our quarterly planning that we define the activities and the objectives and the key results that we want to measure from that. So I've seen startups using that. A more concrete example is a friend of mine. He's a founder. He spent a year deciding which startup to found next. And each idea that he had, he would write a PRFAQ and review with a few folks and to decide if it was worth pursuing or not. So one of the advantages of PRFAQ is if you cannot write a coherent story about a new startup or a new idea, like probably is not a viable one.
You're
Probably
right.
is like not one worth pursuing.
Right. So, what if you actually had an idea, you started it, and things aren't quite, you're getting a little bit of traction, but not much? Could you basically retrofit PRFAQ into it?
Yeah, you can. Like, ideally, you write the PRFAQ before you start
Oh, yeah.
anything, right? So it's helping you find the gaps on your thinking. Like, do I really understand the problem? Do I really understand the customer? Do I really understand the solution? How to get out there? But if you're already halfway there and you're finding like some gaps, it's still worth going back and say like, can I write a coherent story? About this opportunity that we are pursuing. And often what you find is like, you find there is an adjustment, like a course correction on, the direction that you're going.
Mhm.
So that level of clarity is very valuable, particularly if you have a team that you are working with,
Yeah.
right? There is nothing worse than a team where each person is thinking slightly different about the project and
Hmm.
going in a slightly different direction. So it creates a lot of friction and you have to have a lot of meetings to like realign and clarify things.
Yeah.
That's a problem that, if you start from a PRFQ, you usually don't have as much.
Mm. The test in any marketplace with a big entrepreneur is actually okay. So you can have all the planning, you can get the framework, you can do the PRFAQ, and you go to market, and people, there's a big yawn. So like no one's, it's crickets, no one's buying. Um, so quite often companies, a lot of startups do pivot. Like I've heard that quite often that it takes two pivots to get the right, product to
Hmm.
market. So how do you use PRFAQ for maybe to help you in pivoting? Is that because it's a living document rather than a static document?
It's not a living document. The idea is once you establish a vision and a strategy, basically you set out the direction and the North Star for a project. You pursue that until you decide that it's time to pivot or something is not working. And you need to establish a new strategy. So you write a new document.
Okay.
And that document becomes the new thing. The idea is you don't want to spend months working on a PRFAQ. It's really a document that you should be doing like in a week or two, like to bring things together, like to converge on the ideas and the decisions that you're making for what you're going to pursue next.
Hmm.
And you go and you execute, and then you learn what's working and what's not, and then you come back and you're like you adjust the strategy and the vision if you need to, right?
Hmm. Yep. So let's go back to your evolution of the PRFAQ. So is yours more about storytelling? In other words, weaving a narrative into the PRFAQ? Is that the main change you've made?
No, that's like the Amazon. The Amazon is about a narrative.
Right,
It's the same thing. I think what my proposal is, PRFAQ should be lighter and accommodate assumptions and hypotheses, even if you don't have the information. And then you go and you build and you test and you bring back and adjust if needed,
right,
right? On Amazon, because it's a big company, they prefer to have a PRFAQ that is more accurate. So it takes longer to discover the information that needs to go into a PRFAQ before we start executing.
right,
So the way Jeff Bezos talks about is like start slow so you can move fast later,
right.
right? But for many companies, you can do the opposite.
Yeah,
Like you can do the fast thing now and learn and adjust as you go. So it becomes more iterative.
right. Because the challenge was, with startups versus Amazon, Amazon can just almost, it's got, almost bottomless pits of money. In other words, you can go
Yes.
slow. You can invest a lot of money, like, and there's a lot of startups that do that and still fail.
Yeah.
So Suleiman started his, I think, I'm trying to think what his business was with the AI product, raised $1.5 billion and then got, taken over by Microsoft. So despite enormous, almost bottomless bits of, money pit. Um, so, so what you're saying is your PAFAQ is a little bit more, you got to move a little bit faster, not slow. In other words, test faster. In other words, be more iterative and quicker. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And like I said, Amazon has a lot of money. So, a PRFQ and Amazon might be talking about 200 people working on a new project,
Hmm.
right? If it is approved. At a startup, you might be talking like you and your co-founder, deciding to pursue an idea.
Right.
So you don't want to spend 3 months talking about it, but it's good to spend a couple weeks talking about it, right?
Hmm.
Before you jump into the idea, just to make sure that the two of you are aligned and you found the gaps that you don't understand. And it's okay to have gaps, right? As long as you know they are there. So that's what I talk more on the book.
So have you woven a little bit of MVP, minimal viable product, into the PRFAQ? Is that what you're saying as well?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And like there's multiple stages for PRFAQ. You can write your first PRFAQ, which is, there is a problem, but you don't know if the solution is going to work or not. You have a hypothesis about a solution, right? So that's the MVP stage of a product, for example. You're going to build something, you're going to put out there, and you're going to test and see if it works. When it works, right? When you found a product that works and is addressing customer needs, you can write another PRFAQ to say like, okay, how we go big on this, right? So it's talking about the strategy is more focused on go to market and distribution and expansion of the product line versus proving a hypothesis about the solution.
Right. So let's have a look at, today you've done startups, you've written the book, which is great. Well done. Writing a book is not easy.
Nope.
It's basically, and then you get an editor turns up and you give them 300 pages and they look at it and they, remove 100 pages, and like 30%. And
Yeah.
it's like, Stephen King said, it's like killing your children, because you gave birth to the words and the ideas. So sometimes, so did you have an editor involved to help you
I
distill it?
did. I did. Yes. And when you get that copy back from the editor, it takes 24 hours to open the copy because you're afraid of what you're going to see.
That's right. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So it is can be a very painful process, but it is very, very necessary. And I've also
Yeah.
discovered that editing your own work, even though some people say you should do it, I think, well, you're obviously going to do some editing, but I think you need to hand it over to an expert who's, very good at editing, and shut your eyes and hang on.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
Yes.
So you've done the book. Is this a framework for a business as well that you're doing? What are you doing today in the entrepreneurial world apart from writing books and writing blog posts?
Yeah. So, right now I'm spending my time evangelizing, this framework. I think it's a great framework. I think it's going to help people build better products, build better businesses, better programs. I also think it works for the nonprofit and the government agencies and research institutions, because a lot of what they do is like paint a vision of the future and request grants,
Mhm.
right? Or support, or approval. And the PRFAQ is really good at that, right? So regardless if you're doing for yourself or for a big organization, it works on getting people around an idea and, inspiring people as well. So my primary focus right now is to evangelize the framework and promote the book.
Right. So is the next step generating a course, doing coaching? What's the next step after the evangelism stage?
Yeah, definitely. I'm thinking about putting a workshop together to teach people how to do this and how to use this framework. I also have a few ideas around AI and how can AI be used to help you think through your PRFAQ and your product idea and your business idea, but not do the writing for you,
Right.
right? So you can imagine AI as a coach is a great tool today. And like you mentioned that you use like that, I use like that. Instead of asking AI to do the work, you ask AI to help you think through the work or evaluate your work. I think that's a great approach to that. So I have a few ideas on that space.
Right. Cool. So, are you currently running a startup, or you've sold them all and just said, "I want to write a book"? Is that what happened?
Yeah, that's what happened. Yeah, right now it's all the book. I was gonna do the startup with writing the book, but writing the book took longer than I expected and more effort than I expected. So I put all my startup initiatives on the back burner to focus on the book for now.
So, with the book, did you sort of someone approach you to say, "This is a good idea, you should write it," or a publisher turned up, knocked on your door, or an agent and said, "Heard about what you're doing. We want you to write a book," or did you decide to write the book and then go and look for a publisher or an agent?
Yeah, I decided to write the book by myself. Basically, I always wanted to write a book. I think writing is it's a great way to learn and to teach, of course.
Hmm.
So I took the time this time around to like sit down, write the book, put a lot of ideas on paper and publish it. So that's how the genesis of the book came to be.
Right. Yeah, because the ability to self-publish today is actually, you know, 20 years ago before Amazon self-publishing was very difficult. And then you had to put it in paper form, whereas self-publishing day, and I've had a good friend of mine, Mark Schaefer, that worked with publishers, and then he had a real struggle trying to get the rights to his own book back from them so he could take
Yes,
control of it.
yes,
Yeah. So,
yeah.
all right. So, just to wrap things up, can you distill what the PRFAQ framework is with, for each page or each step? Can you outline that for us?
Yeah, the best way that I like to think, the overarching way that I like to think about PRFQ is a tool to help you discover, debate, and decide on a vision and a strategy,
Right.
right? You still own that vision and strategy, you as the person writing the PRFQ, but you collaborate with lots of people, that have different expertise
Hmm.
to infuse the PRFAQ with the right answers, right?
Right.
Or with the right assumptions.
Yep.
So by the time it comes for you to do the planning and execution of your idea, you are not lost.
Right.
You basically have a direction.
Right. So it's important, especially if you've got a team, you're going to actually bring them along with you, because you mentioned the power of narrative and a story to bring your team with you. How important is that?
It's very important. One of the benefits of PRFAQ is actually, in traditional project planning, you do a lot of work and then you go to your manager or to your executive or to your peers and you go like, ta-da, here's the document. Let me present the slide and the presentation, and like I'm trying to sell you on an idea. With the PRFAQ, it's not like that because everyone was involved in the creation of the document, right? So they revised it multiple times, they edited it multiple times, and they were part of it. So there is a sense of ownership. So collaboration is it's built into the method, to create a PRFAQ.
Right. So what we're really talking about is you're not trying to sell something, you're trying to educate people.
Oh, you're trying to educate yourself.
Yes.
You're trying to learn what is the right thing to do, what I don't know, like what are the gaps in the information that I have
Hmm.
that gonna come to bite me later.
Yeah. So for me too, I actually write to learn. Writing is such a powerful way to learn because you've got to make sense of what's is inside your head, which is all these ideas, different things. To put them down on paper so it makes sense to an audience is the art and science of writing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And a lot of people are scared of writing. They feel like I'm gonna have writer's block. The good thing is the PRFAQ is quite structured, so the writing comes more natural, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't have to be a creative writer to write a PRFAQ, right?
Right.
And at the end, what you end up with is a narrative, is a story that actually makes sense.
Right. Do you provide like a free framework, like a PDF that people can download so they can actually see what the PRFAQ looks like in terms of,
Yeah,
yep.
I put together a website, is www.theprfaq.com, or you can search Google for PRFAQ book.
Hmm.
And I have examples, I have templates, I have other resources available on the website as well for people to learn how to do it.
Right. Fantastic. So we'll share that link in the files. So the other thing I've just read, the most fascinating book, which was written by two AI scientists, which talked about that, um, is that we live in a world of setting objectives. And especially we start, and basically a power FAQ, whatever, is actually going, I want to get from A to Z or A to B, right? So
Hmm.
it's a big project, it's complicated, and with our imperfect humanity, the reality is that what you thought was going to exist, the stepping stones are actually, it's not straight ahead, it's to the left or it's to the right. And they use an example of like the journey to achieve a big objective is actually more like following your curiosity into the.
Hmm.
So they use an analogy of you go out into a lake, it's covered with mist, and all you can see is one stepping stone in front of you, which is something you may be curious about. So they're going that almost, and yet, and he's talked to people like Steve Jobs. He didn't start out with building a big company like Apple is today. His idea was he got really bored and he said, I'm doing stuff I really don't like. I'm wasting my parents' money. They sent me to university. So he actually stopped at going to classes. And what he did was he actually went to classes that were interesting to him. And then he
Hmm.
discovered calligraphy, and out of that came Apple.
Yeah.
So, and also I mentioned before, there's Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Hero's Journey, which is the inspiration behind Star Wars, which I mentioned to you earlier. And it's a story arc, the hero's journey. And he said, there's no great purpose in life, he said, really, except to follow your bliss, which is what Steve Jobs did. He actually just took the next step into what was of interest to him. How does PRFAQ fit maybe into that philosophy?
Yeah. That's great. I think the way I would approach that is, and it's what I recommend in the book, is you don't want to paint a vision that is too far into the future.
Yes.
Like what you want is what is the next stone that you're going to climb to,
Mm,
right? So think about 6 months, 12 months, maybe 18 months,
right.
but not a 10-year vision, right?
Yeah.
Like, so you use the PRFAQ by like building this, what is the next thing that we're going to do, that feels like a mission was accomplished,
Right.
right?
Okay.
It's not so small that just feel like a few activities that we got done. It's more like a little bit of a mission, right?
Right.
And then once you get there, did it work? Maybe it didn't work. Maybe it worked better than expected. Then you can think about what is the next mission on this journey.
Okay. So, in other words, don't overthink it. Don't rush too far into the future. Just make it a little bit more, chunk it down so you're not trying to predict the future because basically a big objective way out in the future, like I don't know if Uber had that vision in mind. Quite often they didn't. Amazon is a different beast to what it was when it was just going to be an
Yeah,
online bookstore. So I think the fun's in dreaming and following what's interesting. And as Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's right.
so just to segue off that, um, if you had all the money in the world, what is the what would you do every day, or range of things you would do every day that would bring you joy and would be following your bliss? I'd be interested to see what that looks like for Marcelo.
Yeah, that's a an interesting question, and my answer is going to be very boring because I really like software as a way to solve people's problems.
Hmm.
So if I had more money, I would think of more problems that I could solve with software,
Okay,
right? And address the needs in the market, both for professionals and personal needs.
right. Okay, that's fantastic, and that's one of the questions I always ask at the end. Is okay, so and it sounds like you've been doing it for most of your life, at any rate. So you have been following your bliss,
Yes.
starting from selling your bliss to your father first off, back in when you were 14.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. Marcelo, thank you very much for sharing your story, your experiences, and your expertise. And it's a framework I think would be useful to all of us. I'm certainly going to check it out a bit more. And thank you very much. It's been an absolute blast. I've learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.